Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kāka, ka tangi hoki a hau. Tihei mauri ora. E rere kaua te taku reo me mihi ki te runga e te mata o te whenua o tēnei rohi, ko te tauihu o te waka Māui. Me mihi ki a koutou ngā kai pūpuri mana whenua, koutou anō hoki ko ngā taonga whenua, taonga moana o te tauihu. Ka huri taku aro ki a koutou e whakarauhia nei o koutou ake pūkenga, o koutou mātauranga, o koutou kaha ki te kaupapa nei, ka mihi. Nau mai rā ki tēnei wānanga kōrero he whakapuake e te ahotanga o ngā toi ki whakatū. E tika ana ki a mihi ake ki te ihi, te tapu me te wana o te kaupapa. I ai ki ngā kupu kōrero a kui, koromā, he toi whakairo, he mana tangata. I nā hoki te mea kia whakaniko ngā mahi toi e ngā tuakiritanga o te hāpori. Hei anō, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnei te ara kei runga, ko te ara o tēnei tūpuna, ko te ara o tēnei āreki, ko te ara o tēnei matua a iwi, ko te ara o ranginui e tū ake nei, o papatuānoku e takoto nei. Kia rārau iho rā ngā tapu wai o tānei, tēnei te pō, nau mai te ao. Kia ora everyone, and thanks so much for joining us on, I think it's our third virtual Wānanga now as part of the Waihanga Whakatū Create Nelson engagement leading towards a new arts and creativity strategy for Whakatū Nelson. That was the mihi and karakia we're using to open and commemorate all our art strategy engagements. And I won't take you through it step by step, but at a high level, it's acknowledging you all here, acknowledging this place, acknowledging mana whenua of Te Tauihu and all the treasures, taonga whenua, taonga moana, all the treasures of Te Tauihu that make this place very, very special. It's acknowledging you all here, our panelists this evening, and those of you who are tuning in for your passion and the knowledge that you bring to the arts here in Nelson. It's welcoming you to this wānanga or korero about the future of arts and creativity here in Nelson. And then speaking to and acknowledging the contribution of the arts to the economy and to the well-being of our people and places here in Te Tauihu, and affirming this as a conversation about identity, creative expression, and realising our full creative potential as a city and as a wider region in Te Tauihu, and then a karakia to mark that. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all here to this wānanga. I'm very excited about this conversation because we over the last few weeks, as we've been out talking to communities in Nelson about arts and creativity, we've uncovered some real richness, and the people that I know are enthusiastic and ready to receive that are our councillors who are backing this project. So whilst we've been fronting these conversations so far, what you may have picked up is that there is a councillor working group, which Ali will introduce shortly. And that councillor working group is overseeing the process for developing the arts and creativity strategy. And they'll be familiar faces to you, but we'll take a moment to introduce them just shortly. And tonight's conversation is really about their aspirations and views of the strategy and the journey we're about to embark on together, the potential for Nelson in this space, and also the role of council in the arts and supporting and championing ngā toi or whakatū or the arts here in Nelson. So I'm excited for this conversation. If you're tuning in via Zoom or via Facebook, we'll be monitoring both for comments. So please feel free to fire your questions or pārtai our way, and we'll get them across to our panelists as we get through the conversation this evening. Ali, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, kia ora, and thank you for that lovely introduction, John. It's always nice to hear that actually at the beginning of every meeting. It's a sort of nice grounding of remembering why we're here, which is really lovely. So thank you for that, and welcome to Deputy Mayor Judene Edgar and Councillor Pete Rainey. It's lovely to see you here. And the third member of the working party, who's Councillor Skinner. We're hoping that he'll join us at some time very soon. And he's also very supportive of the work that we're undertaking. And just by way of introduction, before I hand over to the elected representatives, I just thought I'd give a sense of them as individuals, because we like to do that, you know, sort of in the arts, we like to get a little bit personal with things. That's the whole point of it. And so in terms of Tim, he's obviously Chair of Community and Recreation, which is his role within council, but he's also a photographer and has been very all the way through the process so far, has been at pains to bring us back to the fact that there's all, you know, the variety of art forms, which has been, you know, not that we probably need that much reminding, but it's always good to have that that wider view. Pete Rainey, I'm sure most of you know Pete's connection to music. If you don't, then I'd be surprised if you've been living in Nelson for any length of time, but he's a musician, conductor, most famously for founding RockQuest and StageQuest, and is also the council's urban design champion. And that's really important as well within the context of what we're trying to do here, which is actually to extend the arts and creativity strategy across all areas of council activity. And I'm ending with Judene simply because she's also the chair of the working group. So I thought it was good to end at the top. And Judene has she's also got a very strong personal connection with a lot of art and theatre, particularly in Nelson, an improviser with Body in Space, and that working with Off the Cuff, and producer of the Wairau Affray and Mangatapu Murders. But the thing I saw most recently is actually Judene's just written a play which was published in the Nelson Mag, I think, the Nelson Mag, but is also involved in Repertory Fringe and a whole host of other things art related, as well as being the former Fringe Festival trustee, and probably so much else that she does as well that that's not been drawn to my attention. But it's lovely to have you both here, and as I say, hopefully Tim will join us soon, and it would be great to hear from you in terms of what your expectations is and the opportunity that you see for this strategy going forwards. I'll start with you, Judene. How about that?
Cheers. Yeah, so look, it's always hard to tell people to get engaged in a strategy, and that a strategy is somehow going to be sexy or exciting or make a difference in their lives. But I really do like to think, and look, maybe I'm being naive, but I am really hopeful that the more people can input into the strategy, what it does is set us up for council's next long-term plan. And while the arts alone cannot be funded solely by council, central government agencies will go, do you have a strategy? Do you have a plan? You know, why should we fund these things? And that's where sports often get this advantage, because they have Sport Tasman, which is funded by Sport New Zealand. And so it sets them up so beautifully. So when funders go, well, what's the long-term vision? What's the strategy? What are the priorities? That work is done and coordinated by Sports Tasman with the councils under their purview. And so for me, that's one of the gaps, that we don't have any arts advocacy or coordinating body, because the arts is so broad, so eclectic. You know, there's professional, there's amateur, there's youth, and there is no one voice. And not having that body to feed into, I think, makes it very hard. And my personal view as council is not that body. I'll try not to pull too many faces when I say that, but you know, it needs to be led up by the arts in the same way Sport Tasman is led by sports. To me, it needs to be led up by the arts. So what I'm hoping to see is any and every comment, and I will take them as blunt as you want to give them, because without your honesty, without your input, the strategy will not be what we need it to be. We need to know, how do you need to be supported? What venues or places do you need? How are you impeded from doing what you need to do? And that might be through places, through funding, through people, etc., etc. I probably just can't emphasize that enough, is just give us everything. And it's a little easy for me to say that, because Ali and Johny have to then turn it into something that we can translate as a council. But it also will help leverage the arts sector when we look at central government funding or other funding as well. And we know that we need more investment. We know we need more people supporting the arts sector. And so for me, this is the strategy that is meant to be doing that. And the last art strategy, it's very old, but it didn't have a where to. It didn't have guidance and recommendations on how to take the region and the sector on a journey. And it just sort of gave us nearly a snapshot of where we already are, without a vision of how to go, well, this is where we are today. Where do we want to be? And what do we want to do, or what do we need to do to get to be where we need to be? Because we know we've slipped backwards. You know, we used to lead up in the arts, you know, the suitor, the School of Music while we led, you know, RockQuest, Pete, you know, leaders always, but we're not leading anymore. And often we're not even fast followers. So we need your help to set us up to go back to being leaders again. Is that long enough?
Yeah.
Too long?
Brilliant. I'm actually getting quite inspired just listening.
I think we can be far more audacious than we thought about, Johny.
I'm glad these sessions are being recorded because I was actually something that I want to look back on. So that kicked us off on the right note. Thank you, Judene. Excellent. And we'll go to Pete, and then we'll have open it up for discussion.
Kia ora, Johny, and thanks for your welcome. And Mihi, it was fantastic. You know, when we've had a weekend like we've had this last weekend where the weather's been absolutely perfect, you can see and recognise and completely understand why people have been dragging their waka up on the shores of this city for the last, I don't know, 300, 400, 500, 600 or 700 years. You know, it's a fantastic place to be. It's sheltered, it's glorious, and we all love living here and want to be here. And I think that, you know, we can't underestimate how this region has been a magnet, not just for people, but also for creativity and for artistic people who want to come here, because they draw inspiration from the whenua, from this neck of the woods. And I think we have to recognise that. In saying that, you know, it does give us the opportunity to recognise that it's a very special place in that regard. Sure, there are plenty of other places around New Zealand that had strong creative sectors, but Nelson is extra special. And I certainly hope that this strategy will go some way to recognising that, not just looking back at what's happened in the years gone by, our current situation and what we can do better now, but also to the future and how we can position ourselves nationally, and I think internationally, as a centre for the arts. I know that sounds aspirational, but why not? Why not be aspirational? You know, we've had some things over the years that have pointed the way ahead, whether it be Susie and Wearable Arts, whether it be the Davises coming up from Kruena in the 1950s and kicking off a fantastic ceramic, you know, sort of industry here in Nelson, at Kruena, around the on the way out of Nelson, or whether it be the Adam Festival of Chamber Music, which, you know, punches above its weight in terms of what it offers, not only for this city and for this country, but drags people in from all around the world. They're just some really small examples of some things that are truly exciting. And man alive, we've got some things to look forward to. Potentially in a couple of years, we have Matatini coming to Whakatū, which is just going to blow everybody's minds who have never experienced that kind of activity, that kind of joyous outburst of creativity on that scale, ever in this region before. And I just think the potential for the future is fabulous. I do want to acknowledge that the creative sector in this region is highly stressed at the moment. A lot of people are under pressure. A lot of people are really wondering how they're going to exist or stay existing in a creative endeavour in the region. And, you know, it's our responsibility collectively in terms of producing the strategy to try and work out some ways that are going to allow people to make positive decisions about their future in creative sector in Whakatū. There's plenty of uncertainty, whether it's on a national basis or an international basis. I don't need to tell you all that. We all know that. But if we can provide some aspiration, especially for generations that are coming through in creative endeavour, then I think we've you know, got a great opportunity here with this strategy. I hope that the framework that the strategy produces is aspirational, and I hope it provides aspiration for people as well. Anyway, Mihi, thanks a lot.
Kia ora, Pete. Thank you. That was two really, really good opening comments for us to Wānanga on together now. As I said before, if you're tuning in, feel free to send any questions. But I've got one to kick us off that I'd like both of you to answer, and it's the question that we're asking everyone we engage with. It's the universal one that's guiding us through this whole strategy process, which is, take us forward. So if we are successful in this strategy, what will we see? In your minds, if we do this well, if we pull this off, and we get the type of aspiration and ambition you're both referring to there, what will we see for Nelson in your minds? Judene, we'll start with you.
Well, ultimately, I'd like to see people in the arts being able to make a living in the arts. I'd like them not having to, you know, be baristas, be teachers, be insurance agents, which is all jobs friends of mine have got. We've got amazingly talented people, and I want it to enable us to draw enough audience, both locally and throughout, so that we've got audiences, so that they can earn the living they deserve and be based here to do it. They don't have to leave to earn a living in the arts.
Perfectly said. Pete.
I would hope that the relationship, well, in a very focused way, the relationship between Nelson City Council and the arts sector in our community is one that's more relaxed, where we all feel comfortable in our own skin about what we do, that we can move ahead knowing that the support is there and that artistic and creative endeavour is valued, truly valued, and respected. Now, that's not a criticism of where we are, but I see and I hear too many negative issues floating to the surface, or negative points, and I would like to think that we can smooth some of those waters. That's just one aspect, but for me, that would be a good one to kick off with.
And I'm just thinking, you know, off the back of that, and maybe now's a good time to focus on that question of the role of council. So as you both see it, what is the role of council in the arts, and you know, both now in the way you see council service in the arts at the moment, and also in the way you'd like to see it? And maybe we'll flick back to Judene for a start on that.
Yeah, so firstly, council needs to have a role around venues. Now, whether we own all the venues ourselves, that's a broader discussion for the community, but we need to have a role in ensuring that the venues the community needs are there, and that they're not impeded in their ability to deliver and support the arts community. So, you know, whether that's gallery spaces or performing arts spaces or music spaces, etc. So we need a really good stock take and look at that. We also need to look at our role of supporting the arts around events is something we do, but are we paying artists sufficiently? Are we valuing their delivery to events and the criticality of artists to an events? You know, I don't think we should ever be, I don't know if we are, but, you know, we should never be offering people exposure, because exposure doesn't pay any bills, and we generally don't offer road management people exposure, or lighting and tech people exposure. So we need to make sure that we are role modelling, that we value the arts as a professional sector that gets paid accordingly. But we need to make sure we've got the venues and are also supporting events to give them those opportunities.
Well said, Pete.
One of the things that I think is important for us to grapple is that of equitable funding. And often when you're talking about arts funding, it gets compared to the funding that we put into sports, and that's kind of inevitable, I guess. But I wouldn't want to draw that comparison. I would want to say, if we acknowledge that arts are crucial to a modern society and for the well-being of human beings, full stop, then the infrastructure, the arts infrastructural spend is in many ways just as important as footpaths, street lighting, etc. You know, now plenty of people would dispute that. You only have to look at some of the great cities in the world to understand how they truly understand the arts and the importance. But it doesn't have to be the domain of New York and London and Los Angeles, or even one level down to some of the great arts, smaller cities around the world. Ali can probably fill me on where they are. Santa Fe, Portland, I don't know. There's plenty of, you know, examples which don't immediately rush to my mind. But around New Zealand, what are the small cities that really value the arts and provide an unquestioned level of support? Maybe Wanganui, maybe New Plymouth, maybe Gore. You know, it's kind of interesting, really. How can we achieve that kind of scenario in Nelson without attracting massive amounts of criticism from people and just feeling comfortable, as I said, comfortable in our own skin in terms of moving down that pathway? So I would hope that that kind of equitable and understood funding would be a really good pathway.
And I think, sorry, just to pick up on that, one of the things that we've talked about through the strategy is actually being able to elevate it above being individual aspects of the arts domain, you know, to elevate it to a conversation around well-being and around actually the contribution it gives to the wider community. And that's a really clumsy segue into the fact that our wider community goes beyond the boundaries of Nelson City. So it's quite interesting in the course of this conversation that actually we've been approached and connecting with people who live outside of Nelson City, appreciating that this has been instigated by the city and supported by Creative New Zealand. It's very difficult to actually look at it in isolation when the boundary is so tight. So it's just really to get your thoughts on where that sits in relation to the region, and not just necessarily Nelson Tasman, but actually to Tauihu, if we're thinking about the film industry, particularly where we know that there's a strong move over there. So it's just to get your sort of thoughts, I guess, on how far, how elastic you think this could be and should be. I'll start with you, Judene.
Thanks.
Back to you.
Pete's allowed to go first sometimes.
No, it's okay. We're going, you know, one each.
I'm actually really nervous about Pete's carry.
Oh yeah, give it. I'll be back in 10 seconds. Carry on, Judene.
I'm quite paranoid about fire, and you mentioned you were cooking, and it's making me very, very concerned.
Yeah.
This is nothing if not real, is it?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it is really important that we do have that broader Titaihu approach and consideration, because, yeah, you know, the community outside don't see the boundaries, but neither does arts itself. And it is important to have that broader discussion. Look, absolutely, when it comes to what can we do out of this, we can only do what Nelson City Council signs up to. But by Nelson having a decent strategy, I think it will still help the arts and artists in those other areas, which is still Titaihu, even if we call them other areas, but it will help them have the conversations they need to have with funders, with their councils, because ultimately, the more supported everyone is across Titaihu, the better the sector will be. Because, yeah, you know, we know so many people who, you know, deliver services in Nelson, and by services I'm meaning arts services, you know, do come from, you know, live in Tasman and vice versa. And yeah, Ali mentioned the film industry, and there is a very strong connection between Nelson and Marlborough with the Top of the South film sector, and it is growing by strength to strength. War Paint, which is a movie that Judene did, has just won multiple awards in America. We are absolutely, you know, and are we elevating that enough? You know, that actually we have international talent here. You know, there's often that, you know, they're local, and somehow we have this cringe factor about people being local. No, we need to understand we have internationally recognized talent, and we need to recognize and value that talent that we have across Titaihu.
Yeah, absolutely. Pete?
Well, obviously they're not, you know, art doesn't have or doesn't recognize geographical boundaries. We understand that fundamentally, and in my experience as a musician in this region, you know, almost universally, all of the musical activity that I've ever tried to undertake or to direct or produce has involved musicians from right around the region, and any artistic endeavour in the city will always involve people from outside the city. I would like to make a comment about local artists versus artists from outside the city, in that I think it's tremendously important that an arts strategy does recognise local artists, local musicians, local fine artists, whatever the endeavour is, but also recognise the role that the city has to play in bringing outside artists into the city. I think it's tremendously important for people to experience art from all around the country, all around the world. That may be challenging to some who think that an art strategy for Whakatū should be just about Whakatū artists, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I'll be interested to hear people's view on that point.
And that's definitely some discussions that we've been having, to be fair, and particularly around, which is something I'm going to get onto specifically in a second, but particularly around public artworks and how that should also be, there's an idea that it should always be local artists. So that's come through from a number of people. And so we're beginning to have those conversations. So in terms of public art, because I feel it's something that's always upheld, and you said this, Pete, at the beginning, that there's often a negativity around things and a knee-jerk reaction to things. And it's just, so the question I have really is, in terms of the public art that we currently have, which actually when you walk around the city is quite substantial. There's quite a lot of really beautiful pieces that are already there. But how important do you think it is to actually have that physical marcation on the landscape so that we actually are demonstrated as a place of art, appreciating that some of it is within venues and it's performing arts and there's a whole range of artistic endeavour, but how important do you think that sort of that visual presence is?
I think it's tremendously important, and I don't care whether people like it or hate it. What I want them to do is to react to it, because that's the most important thing, is that works of art should gather some kind of reaction from people. That's why people create art, is to engage on a human level. And if you absolutely hate a particular sculpture, then let everybody know about it, because it's going to make people talk about it and make people think about it. Because I'm pretty certain that we can, for every bit of artwork that you would hate, we could find a bit of artwork that you would love. That's just part of being human being, and I would rather that it was that way as opposed to everybody loving it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Judene, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I loved the most wandering around New York, just, I spent lots and lots of time just walking when we were there 2 years ago, which of course feels like an eternity these days, was, suddenly finding this mural, suddenly finding this piece of art. And, there's nothing better than sort of being surprised and delighted. And yeah, and following up from what Pete said, art is meant to challenge. If it's not challenging, then I'm not sure what it's doing. And so, yeah, and so it's meant to make you think, it's meant to challenge your preconceived ideas. And look, I know that interestingly, it is one of the areas of council that we get the most criticism on, but it's because it's very visual. And so it's great that it's very visual. I would still always love more, because art tells such rich stories in itself. And there is so much depth. It's never just, this two-dimensional piece or even a three-dimensional piece. There is so much depth to art. And yeah, and I think it is a gift to the community to give them those opportunities to challenge their ideas and challenge their thinking. And so, yeah, I would always welcome more.
Really interesting as well. I'm gonna. I was having this discussion this morning with one of our local business owners. Well, the suit of pen is accidental, by the way. It was, not sure. Roll with it.
Product placement.
I was having this conversation this morning with Johny Hendrickson, who owns Shutterrock and moved the business here, and he made some really fascinating observations as an entrepreneur, very successful tech entrepreneur, but operating a global business out of Nelson for no other reason other than the way Pete started, which is people love this place. That is it. And I put the question to Johny around what he needs from Nelson, and actually the answer was not a lot, but he placed the importance of the arts and creativity and the growth of that as a sector in Nelson as the most important thing for our city moving forward. You know, it was a really, really inspiring conversation from his perspective, both personally and through the business. That's the most important commitment a city can make, is to arts and creativity. So given that we know this is an amazing place to live and that people have been drawn here for generations to this place because of its natural attributes, we know we've got a really strong history in the arts, but if I could be a bit provocative and say, are we actually great? And do you feel like we are great at the moment as a city? Are we performing well as a city? And the reason I challenge that is not because of the history or to discredit any of the work that's been happening here at the moment, but when I look at things from the economic development work we've done, you know, one measure is the creativity index here in New Zealand that Infometrics produce every year. Nelson is 12th on that index in terms of New Zealand cities. You know, behind several cities that would surprise and shock some people probably, but tracking about half of the national average in terms of creative sector employment. So about around 3.2% of our total workforce is employed in the creative sector versus 6% nationally. So given our strong history and our natural strengths, do you feel like we are still performing well and that Nelson still is that creative hub? Either of you.
Go for it, Pete.
No.
No.
The word. No, I think we've lost our mojo, which is sad, and we need to really concentrate on that fact with this strategy. Is well, for a start, you know, hopefully the strategy is going to point where we want to go, because what do we want to be? Do we want to be at the same level as most other cities in New Zealand? Do we want to be punching above our weight on a national level in terms of a creative environment, or even better than that? And, you know, obviously the strategy theoretically and hopefully will point to ways that we can try and achieve that. But we need to talk to our community about that. We can't just have the group of 4 or 5 of us coming up with a strategy. We need to know what our community think and our young people think. What's their aspiration for the future? So I certainly think we have lost our way. I don't want to today go into all the myriad, you know, levels of why that is so, or what it is that points to that. But there's no question about it. We're not where we were even 10 years ago, or even 20 or 30 years ago, I don't think.
I think I'll just end up repeating a lot of what I said at the start, and that is, if you don't have a vision or a goal, then you've got nothing to achieve, nothing to aim for. And so I think, you know, we've tended to rest on our laurels. Oh, look, we're great, and so therefore we can just stay here. And then people have overtaken us, because, yeah, if you're not continuing to strive for improvement, then you are essentially going backwards. And so that's unfortunately what's happened, is, you know, everyone else has, you know, had visions, you know, wanted to strive for better. And we tended to rest on our laurels and go, but look, we're the home of wow, and we're this and we're that. And then we lost some things, and we didn't, you know, treasure them as the tonga that they are. And you have to, and I think some of that is the conversations, and some of that is the conversations we're going to have as part of this work, is helping people see that art has that intrinsic value. Art is a critical piece of infrastructure. Like Pete said, art is important. I often talk about, you know, what makes a house a home and what makes a city a community. And yeah, you know, we could be a city with roads and 3 waters and all of those things that, you know, all the built infrastructure we need, but what gives us the heart and soul that we need? And to me, that is the arts, because, you know, why do people want to be here? It's more, it's not, people don't shift here because we've got drinking water. People don't shift here because we've got, you know, 2 metre wide pavements. If they do, good on them. I could probably introduce them to, you know, thousands of other towns and cities around the world that also have footpaths and roads and reticulated water schemes.
Well,
And
congratulations, Judene, for bringing the Three Waters debate into
Yeah.
this.
That's just what I was thinking. That was fantastic.
How long have we got?
We're not going there, Pete. It's all about the arts tonight.
Yeah, but yeah,
Okay,
absolutely right.
yeah.
I mean, you know, I've been to New York. It's got absolutely fabulous sewerage system and some of the best footpaths I've ever seen. You know, you're absolutely right.
Brilliant drinking water, though. Can't deny that. I think that's you know, very true. And again, a lot of people we're listening to and hearing from in the initial stages of this consultation would be in that space. I guess the challenge is, how do we actually connect with people outside of that to then make them understand the value of what we're talking about? And I guess, you know, the reason I think, you know, I brought up public art earlier is mainly because it always becomes the stick with which the arts is beaten, you know, all that money that's wasted on something. So how do we articulate, or how do we elevate this and connect with those people that actually don't see that immediate value? That's, I mean, that's the challenge that we've got, and that's what we're going to do through this. But just be interesting to sort of understand from you in terms of your engagements with people who don't support what you do. How do you respond to that, Pete? You know, when people talk to you in that way, what do you use as your response back to them?
It's quite simple. When you get a car license, I mean, most people drive a car on New Zealand roads and think that they own the roads, you know, but actually you have to get a license to drive on the road. You're licensed to, you know, and that gives you the privilege of being able to drive on the road. Similarly, in a community, you pay your rates, and as part of paying your rates, you are engaging in a process which means that you acknowledge that the city will, on your behalf, go out and provide a whole lot of stuff, a whole range of activities that fall under, you know, what the rating process can achieve. Now, if people say, well, you know, you want to just get rid of all of the nice to haves and just stick to the bare essentials like footpaths and sewerage, then a list starts getting generated down which you can go, where you say, well, hang on a second, should we have cemeteries? You know, should we have swimming pools? You know, there are various things that we could go to that fall into a never-ending list of things that you could challenge. Well, what do you call a nice to have, and what do you call a must have? We are human beings, and part of that is that we exist. That's what being means, and humans are creative and are artistic, even whether they acknowledge it or not. And to be a modern society, we have to engage in supporting the creative side of our human being. And I think that's just as important as anything. So that would be the justification I give. In some sectors, that argument would have lasted about 20 seconds, but it's what I believe.
See, I think one thing that, you know, when it comes to the arts, people often recognize people as having this amazing talent, but they don't recognize the work, the skill, the time that goes into. It's not just, oh, well, it's some God-given talent and that's it. Somehow you were born, you picked up a trumpet and you could play it, and there you go, because it's a talent that you've got. And so we don't recognize or talk about the hours and years of, you know, effort that goes into developing that ability. Because you could say the exact same thing about accounting. Oh, well, it's just a talent that you've got, so therefore we'll just give you a round of applause and not pay you. So we have to turn some of the conversations so that we're recognizing that work and energy. So when someone stands on a stage and does 2 hours of playing an instrument or singing, or, you know, making you laugh at a comedy act or doing improvisation, they have put phenomenal work and effort, and I've studied and got student debts and et cetera, to do that for you. And then a month later, they might be doing a different show, and they've had to put a lot of work into that one as well. It's not, they don't then just do the same one show for the rest of their lives. They didn't learn one piece of music. They didn't learn, you know, one comedy sketch. And so they're continually having to put, you know, all this work into their talent to turn it into something that an audience will like. And so a lot of it is reframing a lot of those conversations, because I think people don't understand what goes into it. And, you know, if you think of, you know, a book, people think about the author, but a book is way more than just an author. Yep, an author is pretty critical, but there are editors and design people and marketing people, et cetera, that go into that book being something you could buy. That TV show that people like to watch is not just the actors. You know, it is a cast of hundreds that have helped bring that to you. So yeah, we need to reframe a lot of the conversations. And again, it's like reframing it from a nice to have to local government is about meeting your well-being needs. And yeah, it is a critical element of our social and cultural and mental well-being.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've talked about is or we've been talking about is that supply chain that supports the sector, which is exactly what you were saying. So it's not just the individual at the end of the day who's selling something or performing, but actually they support a whole raft of other people. And I can't remember the dollar now because it's just gone out of my mind, but there's I think it's 60% of all spend by people working in the art sector is spent locally, which is actually a very strong, you know, proportion of whatever they're earning. So I think it's really important that we bring those into the conversation so people understand the value beyond the individual value of the performer. Sorry, Johnny, you were going to say something.
Oh, that's right. I was going to say the exact same thing, actually. That happens often. Thinking about that wider supply chain and also the opportunities for our region outside of, you know, I think often when we look at these strategies and think about the arts, we think about the artists and the art practitioners. But right now we also need to think about hospitality, we need to think about retail, we need to think about our accommodation sector, and as we look to build back better, you know, overused phrase, but if we look to build back better from COVID and think about the type of destination we want to be, what draws people here, what gets them to spend more in our city, what gets them to stay longer, and the arts are a critical part of that. And you know, we all know that right now that our city is suffering, and that those businesses have been quiet for some time now, and COVID's had a big impact on not just directly on the arts sector, but on the wider ecosystem that sits around that. And so, you know, I'm excited for the role in which the arts can play in our economic recovery and regeneration moving forward. And that work has been signalled already, and I think the region's right behind that, which is exciting. I also wonder, and going back to some of your earlier comments from both of you, actually, Pete and Judene, around people being drawn here for the arts, how much of that do you think was down to affordability and livability for us as a city and a region, and has that the impact of affordability in our region being strained, and house prices and the cost of living, has that impacted the arts, do you think, and does that need to be part of the consideration for this work?
Well, unquestionably, it's harder to reside in Whakatū now than ever before in terms of being able to exist, not only with the price of housing, but just generally the cost of living, which is nationwide. But I mean, these are challenging times. I don't think things have changed in that regard. I would have thought that, you know, when there was a great, you know, resurgence in the creative sector in the 50s, say in Nelson, with both painters and potters and to a certain extent musicians, that it still would have been tough living here because there wasn't a lot of work, you know, and most artists at that time weren't doing it full time, they were doing it part time, and you know, so many of them were picking apples or working in the tobacco fields or whatever. A lot of that scenario has kind of changed, although there's plenty of work in the fruit sector at the moment, obviously. So look, it's always going to be a challenge. I think that you know, that's what the strategy is going to have to concentrate on, is working out some clear pathways, you know, in terms of the future. I just wanted to touch on something too in regards to that, is that we have to try and dispel this idea of arts being a nice to have and converting it into a must have. And that's really what the strategy has to do. And no pressure. This is some of the rationale as to why it's tremendously important not only for us as human beings, but also as people living in Whakatū. So if there are some particular lines of the strategy that are going to try and point into how can you actually survive in the sector, in this neck of the woods, then it's tremendously important that we eke those out. Don't ask me right now what they are, but hopefully over the period of the next 3 or 4 months, we're gonna find out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the art strategy can solve the housing crisis. And yes, we are one of the least affordable regions in the country for housing. But I mean, I guess that turns it back to, how are we recognising and how are we recompensing our artists in our art sector? For some of them, there is the ability to, develop online opportunities. And we did see quite a lot of that happening during COVID. Others, it isn't actually a pathway for them to have online offerings. And I think, if I think of the number of years ago when it was decided that everyone was going to be reading online, and so we didn't really need libraries, they were going to be a thing of the past, and so were, hard copy books. And it actually was such a small blip in time, and books are just as popular as ever. I got my kids' devices. They actually had really little interest in them. They like books. And so we need to not just go, what is today's trend, and just follow that way, but actually we just need a sustainable sector that can use opportunities as they present themselves, but is still sustainable in itself.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And in fact, as you were just saying, I was thinking about the response. In part, the strategy has been instigated as a response to COVID, because Creative New Zealand wanted to find a way to support the arts community post the pandemic, or there will probably be a long time before we're post the pandemic, I suspect. But I was just sitting there thinking, as you were saying, people moving to other areas and or realigning their business. And it was in 1987, after there was a major economic crash, that actually RockQuest, World of Wearable Art, and Cirque du Soleil all started in that year. Now that tells me something. It might be complete coincidence, but I suspect there's also a thought process that happens, or something that happens in the creative sector that responds to those things in quite a different way, and the opportunities that come out of it. I'm sure that was obviously uppermost in your mind, Pete. But I do think it's interesting that those things which we still see as being strong creative businesses, and hopefully Cirque du Soleil will come back after the pandemic, all popped up in that same year. And I think we've got an opportunity now through this COVID response and the opportunity to think differently about how we actually approach the arts as that supporter of community engagement, social cohesion, all of those things that we now need to move towards.
Yeah, because we need to let the arts lead.
Yes.
And that's where I think council needs to have that enabling role. It is not our role to lead and to tell artists, this is the box you need to tick, this is the path you need to take. We need to let them have the freedom to find the paths to discover and create new, because otherwise, we wouldn't have a lot of these things we have. And so we need to be enabling, and we could have more. But, we need to keep being enabling.
That spirit of entrepreneurism or entrepreneurial spirit that lies within the arts was part of the essence of what it is to be an artist. Of, well, if I create something, will anybody else like it? I mean, you can create it for yourself, and a lot of artists do that. And potentially that is probably the most important thing. But that thing about, if I create something and somebody else like it, that is something that we need to instill and to support, because that feeling of, oh my God, there's something here that actually could work, that actually could grow. I'm sure when Susie started her show all of those years ago, she didn't think, one little show in a cottage out in Wakefield. Next step, I'll be doing this all around the world. But she did have the feeling that it could grow, and that there was something here, and it was worth following, and it was worth putting some energy, and the ball started rolling, and it grows and grows and grows. You know, and that excitement has to, we have to, you know, encourage that kind of excitement. I think it's really important.
And actually just thinking about that as well, it's been lovely this week, and I'm going to name them specifically just because I think what the Baden Party have done over the last few months has just been astonishing in the way that they've moved into a COVID environment, something, and seeing them performing in Wellington, or, you know, watching them as they've performed in Wellington has just been amazing to see. So I think it is that thing, you know, you start something small and local because you know that you need to do something and respond, and there's always going to be a nervousness about actually making that public, but then the opportunities that come out of that, which just seem to grow. So it's a good point. Sorry, I'm hogging the mic here.
And they just won an award at the Dunedin Fringe.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Even better, look at that.
And it would be fair to say that some of the prime energy behind the Baden Party, from time to time over the last few years, some of those people have been absolutely on the back foot and feeling pretty downtrodden and not feeling like they had anywhere to go. Then all of a sudden, a fantastic idea just takes off. Isn't that exciting? It's really exciting.
So that's making me think we're coming to the end of our conversation, but a brilliant sort of example to wrap up on and think about. So what do you see as the enabling conditions? We all want to see more Baden parties out of Nelson. We want to see those big, the successes we've seen. We also just want to see individual artists and practitioners, as you've said, Judene, you know, be able to make a living. And we know that often that's not the case. And we know that that's been a particularly hard couple of years in that space. So just generally speaking, what kind of conditions do we need to create at Nelson through this strategy for arts and creativity and practitioners and people in that sector to thrive in our city? What's your views on that?
The list is probably a little long. So, but I mean, I think we need venues. We still have venue restrictions. We have venues that, because there's a lot of technical elements to them, it's, you know, it's not just a Spring Grove drill hall where Wales started, but they've got lighting and tech, and so they can be quite expensive to hire. We've got venues that have got debt hanging over their heads. We have unclear pathways for groups of where do we go to get the support. There's no immediate go-to place. We have restrictive procedures, as I said, you know, very defined boxes that need to be ticked. We need to be flexible and adaptive to change as a council. We need, I still think we need some advocacy or support organisation that can do that strategic side. I was going to say boring strategic side, but some of us love strategies, but who can do that strategic thinking and let the artists do the creating. And so they're not having to be all things in the sector just to get an idea ahead and have to, you know, produce business cases and strategies themselves and, you know, do all these things. They can just create. So that's probably the short version shopping list. We need a bit.
Thanks, Judene. Pete?
Things don't always happen by accident. You know, we can look at the city and people go, man, you've got such a great new airport. It's just so cool. I wish we had a building like that. And we all love going through it and flying through it. It's really cool. It didn't happen by accident. It took planning, energy, hard work, cooperation, collaboration, and we end up with a great result. Other examples of things in the city which we go, man, it's just amazing. We've got an independent science entity called the Cawthron Institute, which, you know, employs hundreds of scientists who do fabulous worldwide recognized work in little old Nelson. It's just absolutely fabulous, you know. Or, my God, you should see their sports complex halfway between the two, you know, largest cities or largest, you know, areas of population, the top of the south. They've got this fabulous jointly owned sports facility that has everything in one place, and it's just a magnet for all this activity. It's fabulous. I don't hear the same kind of enthusiasm and yelling from the rooftops coming about the arts sector at the moment. And if we could come out of the strategy going, that's what we're going to do, that's going to be great, that's going to really work. It's not going to annoy a whole bunch of people. It's not going to alienate a whole lot of ratepayers, it's going to have them going, yeah, I see the justification. I understand why it's such a good idea. I'm going to support it. No pressure.
Brilliantly said. No, really good. And I'm going to come back to, we'll come back to both of you just for some final words of encouragement, I guess, or for people who are engaging with the strategy, people who are tuning in tonight, people who will watch this back, thinking about the journey we have ahead in the next few months and what message you'd like to give to sort of wrap up the call. But before I pass back to you for that, I just want to do our own version of that, which is letting people know their opportunities to engage. So if you've been paying attention via the website and Facebook group, then you'll know we are running walks of art every week, not to be confused with Art Walk, which is another brilliant initiative around the city. But these are the best possible start to your week you could ask for. And Judene and Pete said they're going to be on the next one, which is brilliant. And because we kick off at 7
early in the morning
on a Monday. We leave from Miller's Acre, Nelson Eyesight, and we take a great walk around the city to look at, actually, as you said, Pete, the pieces we love and the pieces we loathe, and talk about that, but also actually get a sense of creativity and the possibilities here in place. Think about this city and what we actually really want to see and encourage. But what we've also found through the walks is a brilliant way of the arts community and people who are interested in the arts to connect with each other as well. We're holding those walks because we know people are craving connection and getting together, and it's not appropriate at the moment to throw everyone in a room and have a workshop. And so we're doing workshops instead, out in the open air as a start to your week before you go to work or school, and a chance to get out and explore place with us. So we'll be holding the next one of those the Monday coming at 7:30 a.m. You don't need to register, and as we have proven already, they go ahead, rain or shine. And we'll be continuing these Wānanga. So next week we will be speaking to Anna Calver from Wellington City Council, who's the head of strategy there. Ali and I spent some time with Anna in Wellington last week. She is a brilliant mind in this space, and she's going to be sharing reflections and insights from the Wellington's journey of really doubling down on creativity and what that has meant for the city and for economic development in Wellington. And has worked at Wellington NZ Reader, and also is now at Wellington City Council, as I said, so can talk from both perspectives and offer lots of insights into that space. And then lastly, if you prefer to not join these group conversations, but actually have your say in a one-on-one environment, then we've set up the Nelson Eyesight as Strategy HQ. So in the corner of Nelson Eyesight is starting to look a little bit different now. It's open from 10 till 4 during the week. There's a desk in the corner, there is reading material, and there's the opportunity to sit, take a moment, and write down your thoughts to contribute to the strategy. Everything you write down there and compile for us will be fed through into our engagement work that will help shape the strategy. So it's really important that if you're keen to do that, please take the time. It's a really nice, quiet space to do so. Or if you prefer to just do it from the comforts of your own device, then you can jump on createnelson.nz and just click the button, have your say, and those submissions come straight through to us so you can have early input. Of course, there's going to be opportunities to contribute to the strategy right the way through, including consultation on that final document. But the earlier you give your input, the better as we shape these big ideas. I'll go to Pete and Judene to wrap us up, then I'll close with the karakia. But Ali, did you have anything you want to add to that as we wrap up?
No, I think you've covered just about everything there. And also to say, though, if none of the above suit, just get in touch as well, because we're trying to be as flexible as possible in the way that we engage with people. And I just really would like to thank personally Judene and Pete for just being so honest. And it's great to be able to have this conversation outside of a council environment, and also to really acknowledge Nelson City Council for making this a community-led initiative, because I know that's not easy for councils to do sometimes, because actually it's about putting it out there and then accepting what comes back through the door. And I think that this will be all the greater for it, because we all know that the arts is a great place for collaboration. So I just would like to sort of acknowledge that Nelson City have instigated it in this way. Hence, Johny and I are leading this work. And I think that's a really positive step to have taken. So thank you.
Of course we think that. So there's just one question that's come through. Susan's asked if she can bring her dog. Yes, if you've got a dog, you can bring your dog, I'm sure. For the walks.
It's obligatory. It's obligatory to bring your dog, I'd say.
And as Ali said, reach out if you've got other ways you want to engage. Although I think if we take everyone up on the offers of coffee, we'll be jittery wrecks by the end of it. But let's see how we go. Pete, and then Judene, and then I'll close with the karakia.
Well, I want to thank Johnny, you and Ali for your mahi. It's great. The enthusiasm, energy is very evident. I'd also like to thank some staff behind the scenes who've made this possible, in particular Nikki McDonald, whose enthusiasm and passion for this is just great. So it's exciting. I certainly hope that we engage a really wide cross-section of people in this process, and I would love some of the critics of the arts world in Nelson and the critics of Nelson City Council's involvement with the arts to come forward, because we need to engage and we want to know why and how we can make things work better.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny and Ali. Look, whether you love the arts, whether you hate the arts, whether you just want to do the occasional amateur play or just anything, you know, do a sewing class at one of the local colleges, whatever, or whether you want to make your living in the arts, we want to hear from you. Absolutely what you have to say is valid, and we need to hear all of it. So yeah, in particular, if you don't like what we're doing in the arts because you think we're doing not enough, too much, we need to hear it all, because the strength of the strategy is going to be from your input. So thanking everyone in advance for your time that you're going to put into this. We really value all of your time and energy, and yeah, we're going to be listening to all of it. So thank you, Kia ora.
And Ellie's already said it brilliantly, but to thank both of you and to Councillor Skinner as well, who's contributing through the working group and as right behind this kaupapa, but also the wider council for getting it to this point. We are very fortunate, I think, to have a supportive council in this space. So it feels like the voice of the community is coming through really strongly, the aspirations there, and council are supportive and backing this strategy as well. And so that's an exciting place to be as we look forward to our economic recovery and regeneration and what role the arts can play in that. So I think we're in a good spot, but please, just to reinforce, vote with your feet. Turning up at arts walks and turning up on these Wānanga and contributing really matters. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. Just being there actually really helps build momentum and energy and support behind what we're doing during this phase. So yeah, whakamihi kia koutou katoa, me inui tātou, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki auhu karaite me te harawa o te atua, me te whiwhangateitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene. Kia ora everyone, thank you, have a great evening.
Kia ora.